with a new name for the channel. It's Spirit of Matter, which I assumed would be the reasonable way to call this channel since this is a Spirit of Matter podcast. And today's episode is actually findings from my research on the Saturn squared Uranus Saturn returns. So I was speaking with a bunch of people who had had their Saturn return or alternatively Saturn maturation, but mainly I got people who had Saturn return. During the period of Saturn square Uranus, it is in no way conclusive because I still need to speak with a hell of a lot of people. Um, but what I found was that people did experience a mixture of Saturn, like Saturn returns, and Uranus. So Saturn return, for those of you who don't know what it is and what is the name of this video, was just interesting for you. So Saturn return basically happens every around 28 years or 30 years, which basically denotes the time where Saturn returns to the original position in the natal chart, in your birth chart. And we also have Saturn maturation, which is at around 36, on Saturn square, which is at around also 35, 36, sometimes even more. Like I'm only leaving my Saturn square now, and we call it Saturn square, Saturn return, for as long as Saturn is in the house where Saturn is in the natal chart or where Saturn is squaring. So for me, for example, as I will continue, as I will evolve from my Saturn square, I will just embark on Saturn in my first house. Okay, and I'm working with whole sign houses when I say that. Of course, Placidus can make it a bit more difficult, but I know that the rules of houses, and as long as Saturn is in the house, do apply for Placidus. So you can apply them to your Placidus if you're working with Placidus. I'm working with whole sign, which I found to be also very effective, very predictive, and predictive enough for me to use it because it's comfortable. Like it's comfortable and it's predictive enough to be used. That's why I work with it, and um, and that's for Saturn. Now, what was very special and what invoked my research is not just the research about Saturn return, which we Saturn denotes limitations, boundaries, challenges, maturation of something, like climbing the mountain and reaching fruition in something in your life, having more responsibilities, or alternatively dying and leaving the body. Um, so that's for Saturn. And during the times of Saturn maturation, Saturn square, Saturn return, we usually do things of greater responsibility, or finally we are ready to complete something whole in our lives, and then we can start a new. For example, during my Saturn return, I began my first degree, and only then I was able to begin my first degree. I did not have money to study first degree, and then I went immediately into the second, and I completed that first degree, and that was very, very successful. Um, so Saturn maturation was a whole lot of evolution in terms of my mental health because it is in my 12th house, and a lot of deep realizations that were involving also my Saturn return. So, what's special about the timing of having Saturn maturation or Saturn return when the square to Uranus occurred? And that was around the 2 years. So, anybody who would have um, Saturn in Aquarius would have probably experienced their Saturn return or Saturn maturation. Saturn maturation is also for people who have their natal Saturn in Scorpio. So these groups of people have experienced their Saturn transits when Saturn squares Uranus. Now, why is that so special? Uranus is an outer planet that was very long, it was 2 years on and off. And Uranus is modernly considered the ruler of Aquarius, even though Saturn is the traditional ruler. And Uranus is actually involved with rebelling something, shaking something up. The opposite, it actually involved with the phase of maturation that is being a teenager and revolting the boundaries of your parents and trying new things and going out into the world, taking risks. So, for example, in romance, it's the type of romance that people would have that shake up their established relationships and put them to test if something does not have the rejuvenation needed. They either get their relationships rejuvenated or they would leave the relationship, but not with for the partner that they had an affair with usually. Um, and even though they would not stay either with the partner that they were with or that they had an affair with, even though they would still have a major transformation of their life path that involves also what we call kundalini rise, is the sexual energy, and Uranus is basically involved with the energy of sexuality going from our sex organs up to the third eye and out. For those of you who do sexually energetic sexual practices and so on and so forth. So that would be Uranus. Okay, it takes the energy not where it goes down, but actually flips it and brings it back up. So this is exactly the antithesis of Saturn. And that's why I was so curious to see what would other people have as experiences of that Saturn Uranus maturation. I call it the grow up and rebel, although for some people it would be the other way around. So my first hypothesis was that if you were more on the Saturnian side of your life, you would probably lean into Uranus. But if you were more onto the Uranian side of your life, you would probably lean more into Saturn. I can't tell you if that had fully happened, but here are some stories that I've heard. One person was going, these were all people that knew that I'm using it for research, so yes, there's no, it's not like I take just clients that I spoke with. No, it was particularly research, and the way I conducted this research, I published an ad on astrology groups, both in my country and on Twitter. I think I did also on Twitter. And I asked people if they are willing to join the research about these two times, and I collected the people. Sometimes I had people with Saturn in Pisces, but I still gave them a reading because I think it is fair. I offer them basically a free reading if they participate in the research. And I think it is fair even if a person if I already looked at the chart of a person and interviewed them and they happen to have Saturn in Pisces or something like that, then I would still give them the benefit, but they would not go into the research because it's not the research group. The research group was people who had either Saturn in Scorpio or in Aquarius. Mainly, I spoke with people who had Saturn in Aquarius. Um, that agreed to participate in the research and to have the research results published. So, for example, a story that I heard was a person that was, um, their work was partying. Basically, they were working in pubs and had great nightlives. And as they were reaching this, Saturn maturation, they traveled abroad to a completely other country, and then they were hoping to looking for themselves, and then COVID happened, and they found themselves looking for a job in a foreign country, finding a job in a foreign country, starting a degree, like an actual serious degree, in a foreign country. So that was like a person that was leaning more into their Saturn, into their Uranus, having a Saturn. It was a Saturn return for them, and then they were just traveling to look for themselves, and then suddenly COVID, and they find themselves with being a student of a degree and having a jobby job, and not like parties. Not that working in clubs is not difficult; it's very difficult. I think this is my opinion, but this is more like the defying seriousness type of career that they used to have, like not knowing who they are. And I had an alternative story where a person suddenly got into a significant relationship. I think they got into a significant relationship, they left one, and then they got into another one, um, and and also began to study. Uh, but there was something sudden about this. It's like it suddenly happened for them, which I would expect with Uranus. Like Uranus can make your Saturn maturation very sudden. And so most of these stories had people accepting certain sort of possibility. And I had another person who was moving in with their partner, like suddenly moving in with their partner. And then, that's a very Saturn like move, but it happened in an unexpected way. For me, I think I spoke about this. I had definitely, I learned about psychic attacks, and I was forced to learn about that through experiencing that. And then I realized that, oh my gosh, what I learned about, mental health is very flawed in terms of how its explanatory force. Um, and and I moved to another place and I visited my fatherland, and it was like I was supposed to have like a business open, and I was learning where my taxes are going, and all of these things which are actually very political. I still don't know what it amounts to, or why was I learning all these things that seem to me like somebody who works for not even municipality, but actually the government would need to know, and not just every citizen. I mean, yes, every citizen needs to know that, but most citizens like would not. There would not be a reason that I would be exposed to that if like I wouldn't do something with that in the future. But it's not like I was setting out to do something with that in the future, or like other than speaking up um, and understanding how these things work. But it's like I was shown, why does my business not rise to a certain level, or why am I not ready for that certain level, or all kinds of things that I needed to be aware of. Because I learned like aromatherapy as a way to get away in many ways. Like I learned it as a way to get away, um, and I was very much faced with the necessity of activism for healing and so on. And so I called it the grow up and rebel, because basically I grew up thinking that now I'm going to have my own business and grow from needing whatever resources I needed up until now. And what happened was something very different, very unusual. Okay, a very unusual way to mature, but it had a rebellious, like I had to rebel a lot of things that I've learned. I had to rebel a lot of the processes that other people do that get them to bad places. Even to the point when I was in Netherlands, there was somebody helping me there, and they were in their 60s, and they were raising money to treat their teeth, and they had like a business and they were successful, but they still did not have enough money, like that to treat their teeth. That's all they needed. And I thought, oh my gosh, at 60, like if I follow their advice, then at 60 I might be in a certain situation. And funnily enough, I did want to clean my teeth, which I actually still did not do. I had so many bureaucracy around that, that it was just crazy. So, and yeah, I've heard other stories where people are like have um, funny stories with trying to go for treating their teeth, and then that competing with other Uranian stuff. But it's like you can't go about it in the usual way. And that was pretty much my prediction, because Saturn demands you certain from you certain dedication to do something, to complete something in a traditional way, usually. For me, Saturn return was when I got my first degree in politics and governance and English linguistics, nonetheless. Like, the most official thing. Um, but and I did it in the academia, so it was not, some unusual studies or nothing, just academia per se. That's that. That was what it was. Um, and Saturn, maturation is sort of another phase of that. So I was looking to do Saturn maturation in a way that, okay, I should prepare myself for being, an LLB and like a bigger business or something like that. But no, it happened in a very unusual way. Um, and I saw that with people. So like either there was something sudden or unusual about the circumstances. Even COVID, when you think about it, there's something unusual about the circumstances where they had to go through. Um, or that um, I have to admit it's like, except for my case, which was completely surprising to me. I have to admit that I did not run into too many, like, into people who told me that what they're doing now is unusual. It was more like what they're doing now is like the normal thing that people do, but they were just doing that suddenly or doing that due to unusual circumstances. For me, it was like what I was doing, what I am doing is unusual. But then I have, Uranus in my 10th house of career, and in Sagittarius nonetheless. So it's like, too much Uranus. And every time I try to put myself, like Uranus is in my third, every time I try to put myself through a routine, nothing worked. Even when the routine has to do with astrology, I thought maybe the remedy is to have like astrology days. It's sort of where it's like not really. Um, so that was they grew up in rebel, but most of the people I talked with were more leaning to the Uranus side, I guess, to begin with, and they had more of suddenly become an adult. Suddenly you find the person that you do want to move with. Suddenly you start a degree when you were just looking for yourself. Suddenly you have this big responsibility on you. Where for me it was actually less responsibilities when I think about it today. It's like I'm not in a relationship. Um, Not like I wasn't a parent, but I'm also not a parent. And yeah, and in even my business I couldn't do as usual. So I was like, I guess I was doing too much Saturn. For me, I guess I was doing too much Saturn and I had to do less. So I was trying to do the right things. Um, it just went about in a way that was very unusual. And to me it was like a grow up and rebel, but also to me it's a Saturn maturation. So I have the original Saturn in Scorpio, and for the majority of my life I was playing Saturnian roles. So that's something to take into account. If you have Saturn in Scorpio or Saturn in Aquarius, then do let me know. I would like, I'm interested to find out like what else is there. But yeah, I did not expect to grow into actually less responsibility than more. It's like I did not. Yeah, I guess I fulfilled a lot of big. I know why. Like I know what I did in my life that caused that. But I think a lot of people that have Saturn in Scorpio in either strong positions or had like a lunar chart where in Sidereal they would have more of a Saturnian part of their life earlier in life. I think they would probably be the ones who would grow up and rebel. Um, other than, because for me, I've seen like I was dealing with recovering from CPTSD, which I still am. And then I said, well, okay, I don't care. I like there's still I can do astrology. I can still work. I can still this. And then I got like incredibly sick, and I was like, some things just does not let me do that. I know that Saturn is about to enter my first house, and I know that a lot of the things that I'm supposed to do in this life, I'll begin doing next year. So it's not too much of a surprise for me. But as for the more general thing, I think a lot of Saturn return can be grow up and rebel if it's Saturn maturation for you. A lot of Saturn transits can be grow up and rebel if it's Saturn maturation for you. If you've been doing too many Saturns, if you've been too loyal, if you've been um, too caring for, I don't know, too dedicated, and all that, then you might be in for simply another experience of Saturn transits in your life. And I think I've had this when I had the Sadisati, which was around 2007, if I'm not mistaken. Then Saturn was in Cancer, if I'm not mistaken. And on the one hand, I had a Sadisati. On the other hand, I realized that I have been doing creative work in Saturn-like fashion, because writing is a lot. You commit and you're dedicated and so on and so forth. And then I met a person who's literally recording only by their mood and only when they feel like it, and doing things only when they feel like it. And it was like, okay, like I really need to incorporate more of doing things I feel like doing in my life, and not just what I'm supposed to do in order to complete something, in order to achieve something, in order to manifest my work into being, and so on and so forth. Um, so that was, another Saturn, a sort of Saturn square that I was experiencing. It's like the square that leads to the return. And in the return, I did take on eventually a degree. I was very unsatisfied that I couldn't do it in 2007, and then I had the chance to do it, which came by through very actually unfortunate circumstances, but I was at least dedicating myself to a degree. Um, Anything more I would like to say about that? Well, um, I guess a lot of people who went to agriculture or to self-sufficiency road um, might have had this effect of the Saturn Uranus thingy. It's like Uranus is in Taurus, and people are actually like going to buy land and grow crops, and I'm like, but Uranus is in Taurus. But then it is, oh, but Uranus is a Taurus. So it's like, it's either grow up and rebel, or the act of settling down, the act of buying land, the act of maybe, forming a family becomes rebellious. It's the sort of love that you have as a rebellion of what's happening. It's like, there's a war outside. Good, let's make love and have a baby. You know, that's more the things that we've already seen, with the booming, with the baby boom during COVID. Um, so a lot of those unexpected stuff. But I'm still looking to see what other people who had Saturn maturation go through uh, during this time, or Saturn square. Um, I think how many people do I know at exactly my age? Not a lot. Like the one person I know has long COVID. So it is, it again, it can be people that did more Saturn like things, and um, because Saturn in Scorpio, it's like it forces you to do Saturn like things. It's like you are isolated in your experience, and that experience can be due to something to do with whatever Scorpio rules. So it's like you are in this Saturn place, and then suddenly you can't work, you can't do the mature, you can't be the grown adult anymore, you can't be the grown adult. And I think I'd see a lot of that. So if you do know people, or if you have been born with Saturn in Scorpio, then let me know what your experience is, and I'll see you in my next video. Bye bye.